In the floating city of Venice, in the height of its golden age, there existed a class of women unlike any other in the world. They were not wives, bound to the home and shut away from public life. They were not common women of the streets, despised and discarded. They were something else entirely, educated, cultured, independent, and astonishingly powerful women who moved freely through the highest circles of one of the richest cities on earth, who counted princes, ambassadors, cardinals, and artists among their companions, who wrote poetry and played music and held salons of dazzling wit, and who could command wealth, fame, and influence that respectable wives could only dream of. They were the honest courtesans of Venice, and they occupied one of the strangest and most fascinating positions any women have ever held in history, at once celebrated and condemned, powerful and vulnerable, adored and disposable, living glittering lives of luxury and culture in a world that both prized them and despised them. Today we are going to step into their secret world, who these women really were, how they lived, the extraordinary power some of them wielded, and the precarious knife edge on which their dazzling lives were balanced. This is the secret world of the Venetian courtesan. Using advanced AI trained on the historical records of Renaissance Venice, the surviving writings of the courtesans themselves, the accounts of those who knew them, and the art and literature of the age, we have reconstructed their remarkable world. To understand it, you must first understand the strange and contradictory city that produced them. Venice in this age was one of the wealthiest, most cosmopolitan, and most peculiar cities in the world. A republic built on water, grown rich beyond measure on trade between Europe and the East, it was a city of merchants and nobles, of magnificent palaces lining its canals, of art and music and pleasure, crowded with travelers, diplomats, and merchants from across the known world. And it was a city with a peculiar problem at the heart of its noble class. Among the Venetian patricians, marriage was tightly controlled to preserve family wealth and bloodlines, which meant that many noble sons never married at all, and many noble daughters were sent to convents rather than wed. This left a large population of wealthy, educated, unmarried men and created a demand in this sophisticated and pleasure-loving city for cultured female companionship of a kind that wives, kept secluded and often uneducated, could not provide. Into this gap stepped the courtesan, and Venice, ever practical, ever commercial, came to tolerate and even, in a sense, to celebrate these women who became one of the famous attractions of the city, drawing visitors from across Europe and contributing to Venice's reputation as a city of beauty, luxury, and pleasure. But it is crucial to understand that there were two very different kinds of courtesan, separated by a vast gulf. At the bottom were the common courtesans, women who sold their company for money and were little different in status from ordinary prostitutes, of whom Venice had a great many. But at the top was a small, elite class of women given a special and revealing name, the honest courtesans. The word did not mean honest in the sense of truthful, it meant something closer to honored, respectable, of high standing. The honest courtesan was a world apart from the common woman of the streets. She was educated, often very highly so, in an age when almost all women, even noble wives, received little formal education. She could read and write, often in multiple languages. She knew literature, philosophy, and the classics. She could compose and recite poetry, sing, play musical instruments, and hold her own in sophisticated conversation with the most cultured men of the age. She was, in effect, the only category of woman in her society who was permitted, even encouraged, to be educated, accomplished, witty, and publicly visible, to participate in the intellectual and cultural life of the city as an equal to men. It was a paradox at the very heart of her existence. She gained her freedom and her education precisely because she stood outside the respectable roles of wife and nun. The life of a successful, honest courtesan was one of genuine luxury, culture, and independence. She lived not in some hidden den, but often in a fine house or apartment, elegantly furnished, where she received her companions and held gatherings. She dressed in magnificent clothes, the finest silks and velvets, adorned with jewels and the elaborate fashions of the Venetian elite. Her appearance a careful art, her famous golden hair, achieved by long hours bleaching it in the sun, a celebrated feature of Venetian beauty. She might own valuable possessions, manage her own money, and accumulate real wealth. Unlike a wife whose property belonged to her husband, the courtesan could, in principle, be financially independent, controlling her own affairs in a way almost no other woman of her time could. Her home became a kind of salon, a gathering place where noblemen, scholars, artists, poets, churchmen, and visiting dignitaries came not only for her company, but for the cultured, witty, sophisticated atmosphere she created. The greatest courtesans were celebrities, famous throughout the city and beyond, their beauty and accomplishments renowned, sought out by the powerful and the distinguished, painted by great artists, praised by poets. Some of them were themselves accomplished poets and writers, whose works were published and admired, who corresponded with learned men as intellectual equals, and who left behind a real literary legacy, a remarkable achievement for women in an age that gave women almost no public voice at all. And some courtesans wielded real power and influence, moving through the corridors of wealth and politics. Because they associated intimately with powerful men, ambassadors, nobles, senators, churchmen, the great courtesans were privy to secrets, to gossip, to the undercurrents of politics and diplomacy. A clever courtesan could become a confidant, an influence, a source of information, a quiet power behind the scenes, her favor sought and her displeasure feared. The relationships she formed could be long and genuine, not mere transactions but real bonds of companionship, affection, and mutual benefit with men of the highest rank. She lived a life of a freedom and a public presence that respectable women were utterly denied, free to move about the city, to attend gatherings, to engage in the cultural life of one of the world's great centers of art and learning, to be admired and celebrated for her wit and her accomplishments rather than hidden away. In a world that confined wives to the home and daughters to the convent, the courtesan, paradoxically, was the freest woman in Venice and the most visible, living a life of independence, culture, and influence that the structure of her society otherwise reserved entirely for men. But this glittering freedom was balanced on a knife edge, and the courtesan's life was shadowed always by danger and precariousness. For all her wealth and fame, the courtesan had no security. Her position depended entirely on her beauty, her youth, her charm, and the favor of her patrons, and all of these could vanish. Age was a relentless enemy. As her youth and beauty faded, so could her fortunes, and a courtesan who failed to secure her future could fall from luxury into poverty, even into the common prostitution she had once risen above. She lived in a society that, even as it celebrated her, also condemned and despised her. The church preached against her. The authorities passed laws to restrict her, laws governing what she could wear, where she could go, how she must be distinguished from respectable women, periodically cracking down in waves of moral reform. She could be the target of male jealousy, violence, and cruelty, and had limited protection against those who wished her harm. She faced the constant danger of disease in an age before any effective medicine and the perils of pregnancy and childbirth. And she lived always under the threat of scandal, of denunciation, of falling suddenly from favor and grace. Her dazzling life was real, but it was fragile, dependent on the goodwill of a society that could turn on her, and on advantages of youth and beauty that time would inevitably steal away. She was both the freest woman in Venice and one of the most vulnerable, and these two truths were inseparable. The most famous of these women rose to extraordinary heights, and their stories capture the full glory and tragedy of the courtesan's world. The greatest honest courtesans became legends in their own time, celebrated for their beauty, their brilliance, and their art, moving among the highest in the land, their names known across Europe. Some left behind published poetry of real literary merit, defending their way of life, exploring love and desire, and the female experience with a frankness and an intelligence that was extraordinary for a woman of the age, claiming an intellectual and creative voice that their society otherwise denied to all women. Some, when threatened by the moral authorities, defended themselves with wit, courage, and learning. But even the greatest were not immune to the precariousness of their position, and the stories of these famous women often carried, in the end, a note of decline, of loss, of the fading of fortune as youth and favor passed. Their lives embodied the central paradox of their existence, that they achieved a freedom, an education, a public voice, and an influence that no respectable woman of their time could attain, but that they paid for it with insecurity, condemnation, and a fall that was, for many, as steep as their rise had been dazzling. They were perhaps the only women of their world who got to live as full participants in its glittering cultural life, and they did so always at the edge of a precipice. That was the secret world of the Venetian courtesan, a class of women who occupied one of the strangest and most fascinating positions in all of history, the honest courtesans of Renaissance Venice, educated, cultured, independent and powerful in an age that allowed women almost no education, independence or power at all. Women who lived in luxury, dressed in silk and jewels, held salons of dazzling wit, wrote poetry, made music, moved among princes and cardinals and ambassadors, and wielded real wealth and influence, the freest and most visible women in one of the world's richest cities. And women who balanced this glittering existence on a knife edge, their fortunes dependent on youth and beauty and favor, condemned even as they were celebrated, restricted by law, threatened by scandal and disease and age, always at the edge of a fall. They were a product of the peculiar contradictions of their city and their age, a society that confined respectable women to the home and the convent, and that therefore created, in the courtesan, a single category of woman permitted to be free, brilliant, and publicly alive, at the price of standing forever outside respectability. Their world has long vanished, but their voices survive, in the poetry some of them left behind, and in the portraits painted of them by the great artists of Venice. And they remain among the most fascinating women in all of history, the brilliant, glittering, vulnerable courtesans of the floating city, who found in a world built to silence women a way to be heard.